Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Around the Empire podcast is listener-supported independent media. Please pitch in at patreon.com/aroundtheempire or via the support links on our website, aroundtheempire.com. Help build up the YouTube channel by subscribing there. That's free, youtube.com/c/aroundtheempire. I'm gearing up to add some Around the Empire video shows and other video content soon, in addition to the audio podcast. Today we welcome author and editor Teodrose Fikre for a discussion on his profound article about Malcolm X's warnings on American political parties and their quote-unquote bourgeois hustlers, about how colonization works, the weaponization of identity, the deliberate division of people, and the need for unity and collaboration for inclusive justice. Teodrose Fikre is the co-founder and editor of Ghion Journal and the host of video shows on the Ghion Journal YouTube channel. Originally from Ethiopia, he's a published author, prolific writer, former consultant in the defense industry, and a former community organizer and political activist. He told me about his 2-year journey, going from a life of upper middle class privilege to a time of hardship and struggle, and how this taught him a valuable lesson in the essence of togetherness and the need to speak against injustice. He believes that we should focus not just on the symptoms, but need to get over the divides and actually speak truth to power instead of speaking half-truth to power. And that's what the Ghion Journal is all about. His writing defies conventional wisdom and challenges readers to look outside the constraints of labels and ideologies that serve to splinter the people. This episode was recorded on February 23rd, 2019. Welcome, Teodrose Fikre. Welcome to Around the Empire. It's great to meet you, and thanks so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation. It's been a privilege to talk to a lot of independent journalists and independent media sources. So, the way that we can all get our voices heard is to collaborate. So that's why I gladly accepted your invitation, and I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, it's so true. I am kind of excited about what's going on with this grassroots media thing. Right. It's not easy to do it. Obviously, there's a certain loose network forming, and people are for the most part sort of cheering each other on, and even though technically competitors, but nobody seems to be looking at it that way. Yeah. And you just finally get some. It's a relief too, and in addition to being informative, it just I feel relieved that there are other people stepping up to do this. Yeah. And I think it takes, at the risk of seeming like patting myself on the back, I'm trying not to do that. But it takes a certain amount of courage. It takes a lot of time and effort that you just have to mostly donate. There's not a lot of money in this.
Oh yeah. So, I'm pretty sure upwards of, I don't know, I haven't done a statistical analysis on this, but upwards of 90% of people that are doing this type of independent media or independent journalism, this is not their profession, this is their passion. And we have day jobs. And so we work by day and write by night, or broadcast by night. And so this is, we're serving two masters in this way. But this is what our passion is. So, you
and to the plate. Yeah. And that could be tricky depending on, what your profession is. And make changes in that. As you were telling me earlier, you in the past have worked for the defense industry, and right. I was really young, and one was just an intern job, so I didn't have any influence in that. But I worked at, I think a lot of people at one time or another end up working for a defense contractor. I've worked in the finance sector myself too, so
I used to work. Fun fact. I used to work at Booz Allen Hamilton, which is the same company that Edward Snowden used to work at. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that the grade that we were at, I think he was a lead associate and I was an associate. So he was like one notch above me. I'd say this I do have to pause and stipulate one thing. he worked at NSA and was working on programs that I never knew about. I was basically a project manager, and so my clearance level was secret. So he had all kinds of other stuff behind him. So it's not the same thing. But ultimately though, this world kind of bends you, and you have a choice to either be an idealist and be homeless, or you have to feed your family and yourself. And so we all kind of contribute to these things. But I'm hoping that as we do that, we just try and do our part, as opposed to being purist about it or being completely the opposite way and being all about self. That we should just try to affect change as much as we can.
Yeah, exactly. And it's same for me particularly when I was in the finance sector. It was a Wall Street guerrilla company, but
Right.
but I was in the IT area,
Right.
so we really separated from the traders. I did have to deal with brokers and things like that, but I mean, these were all I thought like particularly good people.
Yeah.
They were really trying to do their best and all that. So there's a big difference between just working in that sector and being say complicit, if you will.
Right. Yeah. By the way, if I could add on to that, I was talking to Nico House 2 days ago. He had me on his show, and he said something that was very thought provoking, because I'm always trying to figure out what's the demarcation point between compliance and active evil. And he said something that kind of blew my mind. He said even the CEO is a slave to the system, right? Because he's doing what he has to do in order to get his paycheck. So ultimately, I think there is a demarcation somewhere, though.
Yeah.
You can't equate me and you to, for example, George Soros or Zuckerberg or the Bezos, these uber billionaires that are able to dictate policy and decisions and dictate conversations versus the rest of us who kind of comply because we have no other choice. So there is a demarcation point. I just don't know where that is.
Yeah. I struggle with that same question in a slightly different way, and that's with the war machine.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Who's committing the war crimes?
Right.
Are we all guilty of it?
Right.
And
yeah.
And that's the same kind of question. And but speaking of really insightful things and things that really made you think, for our audience, the reason why I contacted Teodrose is because I read this article, an essay really that he wrote, and I'll link it in the show notes. It's titled "The Wisdom of Malcolm X." He was warning us about these bourgeois. Is this bourgeois or bourgeoisie?
Yeah.
Bourgeois hustlers.
Somebody corrected me on that too. So bourgeoisie is what they are, and bourgeois is who they are. So it's the bourgeois hustlers.
I don't know.
I learned it myself too. I didn't know. So
I don't know that, so it doesn't matter to me. So, but you really, as I was saying to you earlier, you've really kind of knocked my socks off with this.
Right.
And I have some things highlighted in here that maybe we can. I don't know exactly how we should approach this.
Sure.
I've never done my due diligence. To be honest, I've never done my due diligence on Malcolm X. And I'm not quite sure why, because I had a lot of interest in MLK. I have a feeling that I was sort of conditioned to not listen to what that guy said.
Yep.
And I can't blame that on everybody else, though, right? I just didn't take the time to really learn about the guy. But I did know, I came across a lot of his quotes over time and thought, wow, that's pretty, I agree with that.
Right.
And that's pretty insightful. And before this, I thought, well, let me just listen to one of his interviews or maybe a little mini doc. So I went to YouTube, and the first one that came up was an interview. And I think I may have picked the right one for this essay, because it was an interview with, I guess, Mike Wallace.
Okay. Yeah.
And he really says a lot of the things that you talk about in this article about him, about his evolution. He explained that whole thing in that Wallace interview. Well, there's a lot of really other interesting things in that interview too, because Wallace is trying to pin him down and saying, you guys going to get guns? You guys going to get guns? Are you going to be the leader of the, I mean, he was really, it was an intense interview. I'll link that too in the show notes, because If you haven't seen that, you got to see that to try to capture the, what the zeitgeist was at that point in time. And also, Malcolm X had to explain the most basic things to Mike Wallace, the things that he didn't get. Like why they're upset, why they might rise up. And he had to explain it in very basic terms to Wallace, and Wallace still didn't seem to get it. So anyway, but let's I don't want to get too far off track.
No, you're good. You're good.
Yeah. So anyway, you start out the article. Well, do you want to do anything else to sort of tee this up before I start asking questions?
Yeah, so I want to kind of give it a little bit of a context, right?
Yeah.
So I don't want to get preachy over here.
I get it.
I wanted to be a preacher a long time ago. That was a long time ago. Let's just say life decisions I've made took me away from that. But all that being said, there's actually almost a biblical connotation to this, in that very flawed people in life, at some point they have some type of an awakening, and then they become very prophetic. And so if you look at this throughout, either within the Bible, biblical context, or the historical context, people who at once were either divisive, or they were very their outlook was, even though they might have had the right intentions, the agitation or the anger or the antagonism of injustice made them become just as divisive as what they were trying to speak against. So Malcolm X is a classic example of that, in that he was very sectional initially when he started off. He was going around calling quote unquote white people devils, and so in that way, irrespective of how he might have been justified, and you have to understand what his background is. His father was killed by the KKK, I think, in Michigan. So he has wounds in his soul that he was able to then vent with his rhetoric. But when he went to Mecca during the latter stages of his life and saw a sea of humanity praying together and trying to work together, he realized he had his quote unquote Mecca moment, where he knew that injustice was not necessarily horizontal in nature, as in black versus white, or left versus right, but it was really about vertical, the very powerful and the powerless, the rest of humanity, the top 0.01%, and the rest of us who are being mugged in one way or another. So he pivoted and started speaking up about inclusive justice, and that is when Malcolm X became a dire threat to the status quo, and that's when he got eliminated. And in fact, I was thinking about writing an article now about how the 1960s was the decade that aborted leadership in America, one after the other. John F. Kennedy, RFK, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, people that were giants of their time, were assassinated. In each instance, it was a lone gunman that was blamed. Now, if you know anything about trends, once might be an accident, twice might be kind of. When it happens continuously, it's not just a one-off. There were a lot of.
You don't have to convince me of that.
Yeah. And in fact, we don't even have to do research on this that much. COINTELPRO was set up by J. Edgar Hoover to maliciously harass Martin Luther King and MLK. I mean, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And so, what I chose to write about within the article then was to talk about how there was even before he pivoted, Malcolm X hit upon the way that the status quo splits a society into sections, ghettoizes all kinds of various subgroups, and gets us so agitated at each other that we end up fighting each other. And the personification of this virus is the Democrat Party. I don't even call them the Democratic Party because that's a lie. They're a Democrat Party. I used to get upset when Republicans used to say that.
Right.
But now, see, they're all right. The Democrat Party and the Republican Party are two branches of the same virus. They're the Ebola of America, a pox coming from both houses that's being pervaded on all our homes. And so Malcolm X, in fact, the quote that I used he said, be careful of there's no difference between Democrats and Republicans. One, the Republicans are like wolves, and the Democrats are like foxes.
Right.
One, one lets you when he shows you his teeth, you know he's going to eat you. The other one smiles at you and makes you think that he cares about you. Right before he eats you, the end result is the same. So that's what we have. And for me personally, I used to be a Democrat. I busted my, excuse my language, I busted my ass to get Obama elected in 2008. There's a lot of things I don't talk about in terms of what I did ultimately within that campaign. But even yesterday, within the article, for example, there was a speech idea that I ended up putting to my fraternity brother in Chicago. And that speech idea, when he saw it, he was like, wow, this is amazing. He forwards that on to Valerie Jarrett and Obama's, his sister, and then they forwarded to the campaign. Next thing I know, I'm watching his South Carolina victory speech, and I could see my words being used. And then Mike sends me an email back saying, "Yo, they incorporated your speech idea into the South Carolina victory speech." I was proud of that moment. There's a lot of things I did in 2008 when I was very proud of. I thought I would look back on and say, "Hey, kids, I helped to get the quote unquote first black president elected." And what I did instead, because of my naivety, because of me wanting to believe in something greater than myself, and ultimately because of identity politics, what I actually did was elect a fox, who, to be honest, he was a wolf. He was a fox, a wolf and fox clothing. What he did in 2008, in terms of bailing out Wall Street, enriching the very criminals that bled the Americans, the sea of humanity that's being stacked up in homeless shelters throughout America. A lot of those, maybe even majority of those people, lost their homes after 2008. And that you could blame directly on Obama, because he could have done something to help out the homeowners. Instead, he gave over $14 trillion by way of quantitative easing, by way of zero interest rate policy and bailouts to the criminals that bled our country, and to the rest of us, to the victims. He gave us lip service. And so this is what the fox is. So Malcolm X talked about it. There was another section within the autobiography of Malcolm X where he talked about the bourgeois, quote unquote, the bourgeois Negroes. I know you can't say that word these days, but I'm quoting him specifically when I say this. And he talked about how the fact of these upper crust, quote unquote, black folks, black leaders, the privileged within the black community, instead of using their education, using their resources and their means to help the people, are actually stepping on the people to make it. This is exactly who Obama was, Kamala Harris is, Cory Booker is, almost the entirety of the Congressional Black Caucus is, including, by the way, John Lewis, a man who struggled at the forefront of the civil rights movement, and now decided to become all about himself. And he's the face that they put on Democrats to make it seem like they care about us. So I don't want to go on too much, but this is the essence of what I talked about within the article, giving context to this, because we get so caught up in identity that we forget that they're actually working against our interests just as much, if not even more so than Republicans. Because at least with the Republicans, I know where they stand. I know how malicious they are. But with Democrats, it's like they put their arm around you and they're suffocating you in the process.
Yeah, exactly. I could relate to a lot of that. As I was telling you a little bit earlier, is that there are a lot of similarities between racism and sexism, right? So they're not exactly the same. But I get some of those things in the places where they are the same. And as far as Obama, I was a lifelong Democrat too. My family was pretty much what you'd call a yellow dog Democrat. Just voting's easy. Just flip that thing all the way down the Democrat column,
right.
And I guess they even have a phrase for it now: vote blue no matter who.
Yeah.
Things like that.
You're asking to be abused.
Now, I was just my nature. I was like born a skeptic, and I'm a little bit rebellious. And so, I was never sort of all in on that, even though that's how I was raised. But, For the most part, when in doubt, just vote for the Democrat. I started questioning that actually early on, really when I first started voting in the 80s.
Right.
Um, and then, I really came to dislike the Clintons because I felt that they were not representing us.
Right.
But then toward the end of the Clinton years, I felt like I needed that team tribal thing, blue team kicked in, and I felt like I needed to defend them because they were being treated. It really was a witch hunt. That whole not that they weren't corrupt and everything else, but that special counsel was a total witch hunt.
Right. Yeah.
And what they did to them was just, I thought, was just awful. And I can remember at work, like some guys would have that Rush Limbaugh guy on the radio in the break room, and I would hear them talking about Hillary as a feminazi or whatever, and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, enough, all right. And so I felt a little defensive for them at the time, but I still wasn't happy with their policies and what they were doing to the party,
Right.
and how I just didn't feel represented. But then I sort of came back during the Bush years. I came back to the Democrats because it seemed like, there was opposition to the war, and I was on board with that. And it was easy to be a Democrat at that point in time. And during the primary, I was a John Edwards supporter, but he, of course, crashed and burned. And then I was like, all right, I wasn't crazy about either. From a policy standpoint, either Hillary or Obama, and I would go back and I didn't have much time to decide before I voted, but in the end, I supported Obama, of course, and I gathered, I felt good to be part of that movement. I definitely wanted a black man to be president or a woman to be president. I wanted to break those ceilings, and by the end of it, I was all in. In November, I took all three of my kids and my little boys into the voting booth with me, and we all pressed the button together, silly things like that. But it was a moment like that where I felt like I was doing the right thing. And I felt like he had a mandate, and he said he was going to do some things that were going to be major change. And I was all in on that. Right.
Yeah.
And then it took almost no time to realize, wait, none of that was going to happen. None of it was going to happen.
You're better than me. It took me 6 years almost. Like, cognitive dissonance is no joke because you keep rationalizing and saying, well, you know what? Maybe after the first election, and then you just keep it's like when you're betting in Vegas, you keep rationalizing why you shouldn't walk away. My luck is going to turn around. So for me, it took me to become a statistic, to become homeless and to see the brokenness that I never saw while I was sipping my latte and protesting during the weekend while I was working at a defense consulting company during the week. These things became like some type of a hobby for me. But then when I became a statistic, then I realized exactly how the game was being played. And by the way, even what you talked about with Clinton, yeah, I was upset too with in 1996. With Monica, the whole, it started immediately. Actually, the Watergate, all kinds of scandals that followed them. But what I see in hindsight, there's no educator greater than hindsight. The most amazing professor I've ever met in my life is Mr. Hindsight. I realize now, though, that whole thing, our politics is choreographed. So the same way it's happening right now. Trump, they keep investigating him. All these things are like a kabuki dance meant to distract us. Because at the core, no matter what Democrats say, when it comes to foreign policy decisions, specifically war and the military-industrial complex, they vote in lockstep with the Republicans and Trump. They just passed the largest defense expenditure in the history of America, and almost every Democrat voted for it. So they're a bunch of liars, and they're inciting our emotions by putting. I'm going to tell you a quick story. In 2000, I think it was 2004. This is not my third time telling the story, but it is so. It gives so much light to exactly what our politics is. I used to watch a show called Crossfire on CNN, I think back then it was hosted by I forgot his name. He
I
passed
think
away.
Tucker Carlson was in
No,
that,
before
and
him. Before
okay,
him, it was
I remember that. Yeah.
the guy passed away, but they used to call him the Prince of Darkness. Anyways,
Oh yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
I
I,
know who you mean.
so two older gentlemen, and they would that was back in 2004, I think it was, and so they had on a guest two congressmen, and like I said, I don't know exactly who it is, and I've been trying to find this episode for a long time. I just don't know exactly what day it was, but I think one of them, if I remember correctly, was Barney Frank, and the other one I forgot who it was. I have no idea who the other. It was a Republican, and they were arguing about something. I think it was. In fact, if I remember correctly, it might have even been before that. It was right around the time that Bush got elected, because that was when they were doing the Supreme Court decision on that.
Yeah.
But anyways, it doesn't really what episode it was or what year it was. Even though it slips my mind, is not necessarily as consequential as what ultimately happened. So I'm watching this show, which happens all the time, of pitting left versus right, Republican versus Democrat, and like my tribal instincts are being satiated, uh, because I'm over here watching this, and I'm like, yes, get him. Like I'm watching a sports show, like it was like a gladiator show, basically. And so I finished watching that, and then later on, I think I went to school, or I was in DC for some reason, and I used to always listen to political shows back in the day. And there's always this one restaurant called Old Ebba's Grill, by the White House, that they're always promoting on political shows, and I'm like, I'm gonna check this out one of these days. Why are they always promoting it? So I stopped by there to get a beer, and at one point I walked towards the back to use the bathroom, and who do I see? The same two people that were on CNN hanging out together and drinking, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
and back then it didn't really hit me what the implications of that. I just chalked it up as that's kind of ironic. But now look again, Professor Hindsight. I'm like, holy crap! The whole thing, they made the whole thing up. It was scripted. That they were acting. They were acting as if they were mad at each other. But behind closed doors, once the camera lights go off, once the microphones are no longer hot, whatever vitriol that they were unleashing on each other, it turns off, and they become buddies, and they're in bed with each other. And sometimes, literally, they're in bed with each other. And who gets screwed in the process? Us.
Yeah.
This the Roman Empire. They used to fool people with bread and circus. The bread was the dependency, because you had to be dependent on the Roman government, the senators and the Caesars back then. So that was the bread. We'll protect you. We'll feed you. And then the circus was the gladiator shows. And between the bread and circus, the public they basically became impotent. And our bread and circus, the Roman Empire's bread and circus, pales into comparison to what we have. More than 50% of Americans are in fact directly dependent on the government. To be honest, all of us are in one shape or another. Even if most people that have a job are tied in directly to the government in one shape or the other. And then the bread, the circus is politics, and we're getting bamboo. To quote Malcolm X, we're getting bamboozled on a daily basis, because whatever the anger and the recriminations that they display on TV, Democrats, Republicans, behind closed doors, they're working together. And so the wisdom of Malcolm X kicks in again. This is exactly what he talked about.
Yep, exactly. And in your essay, you say they differ in their methods. This is a quote. They differ in their methods, but in the end, they feast on us, regardless of their gang affiliation.
Yeah.
Both parties are subsidiaries of corporations and oligarchs. Our entire political system is based on two factions bamboozling their respective bases while manufacturing dissension on all sides.
Yep.
And that was one of the ones I highlighted. You also mentioned that Democrats irritate you more than Republicans.
Yeah.
That's true of me too, and it bothers me. Like I question myself. I say, why do I keep going back and saying, well, but this all started under Obama.
Right.
And, these things like, why am I so, and I guess it's probably sort of like a family thing where, there's a different kind of anger toward your family. But I don't know. I feel that way too. But you really explain that here.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. I was going to actually even go further onto that. So this I'm going to harken back to my older days when I was quote unquote a player. I'm married now, so I'm no longer in that life of trying to chase everything. That was a long time ago. But
right.
I say that to kind of give an analogy of sorts. So in my youthful days, if somebody let's say I have a one night stand, right? I'm bringing this up for a reason, and I see that person the next week with another person. I'm not gonna get upset about it, right? It's a given. We both understood it was just a fling, and we move on, right? So consider the Republicans like a one night stand. There's no expectation there. I know exactly what this is about. I know what they're trying to do to us. Fine, right? But then fast forward, if I see my wife on a date with somebody, of course I'm going to be upset. I'm going to be triggered by that more because there's a level of proximity and intimacy that I feel will be betrayed. So that's when I get triggered by Democrats more, and I don't really pay attention as much with the Republicans.
You're right.
It's because I identify. They sold me dreams. They convinced me that they were for me, and I believed them. The Republicans never said they tried to convince me that they were very transparent. There's honesty in their malice. Democrats, on the other hand, say we care for the marginalized. We're here for the oppressed, and then come to find out, if you really look at the history of Democrats, I think in a lot of ways what Republicans do. Republicans are like the evil scientists that come up with heinous policies, and then it's the Democrats that enact them. And if you look at, for example, the Federal Reserve in 1913, it was implemented under Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat. The Federal Reserve implemented central banking. If you want to look at almost the root source of economic inequalities in America, is because of central banking. They've basically made the big banks like J.P. Morgan was the one that actually created the Federal Reserve. It was under his insistence. He bailed out America in 1913, I think it was, and his price for his benevolence was the central bank that he controlled. And to this day, we have a Federal Reserve that controls monetary policies. That is when people keep talking about the deep state in America, there's no need to come up with exotic theories. That is the evidence state. They're the ones that can't, by law, Congress nor the president can interfere with the decisions that the Federal Reserve make. So then that means they're not accountable to Congress or the president. By extension, they're not accountable to us. They make decisions on their own. This is a foreign power that invaded America and turned America into indentured servants of banks. So that was passed by Woodrow Wilson. Then fast forward 25 years, then FDR comes along, and in order to enhance the power that the Federal Reserve has over America, he repossesses gold from almost every American in order to make fiat currency king. And so then what that enabled the Federal Reserve to do then is basically print money on demand and control inflation. Because without gold being there to back the dollar, then everything's based upon policy decisions. So Woodrow Wilson enacted the Federal Reserve. FDR enlarged it by repossessing gold. LBJ, the Great Society, was nothing more than effectively making Americans dependent on government. It was, I'm not advocating that we take it away now all of a sudden because that would be too painful. But instead of empowering communities, what they basically did, specifically within the Black community, by the way, they incentivized families to be basically broken apart because a single mother would get more benefits on her own than if she stayed with her husband. So a lot of the husbands, out of sheer necessity, sometimes would then move out of the household in order to get benefits. And there's a lot of other aspects to the Great Society. And if you go back and watch videos of LBJ, this man was a racist. You will see him like saying the N word. Yeah, he was. And by the way, and like we said about this 1960s, we'll never know exactly who the invisible hands that led to the death of John F. Kennedy, R.F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. But LBJ, when JFK was assassinated, he gladly went down there. He told Jackie Kennedy to basically just he told her to snap out of it, basically. And he immediately he grabbed power. And there's really we'll never know, because everyone that tries to speak on these things are dismissed as conspiracy theorists. But anyways, that's another topic for another day.
Right. But I mean, he's the one who benefited the most, you could say. And he also, from this war and foreign policy perspective, he also reversed JFK's foreign policy. Yes. He immediately escalated the Vietnam War, and so there's a lot to think about in that.
Yeah. And also, so you have Woodrow Wilson, the Federal Reserve. Then FDR enhanced the central banking model, and he gave us pennies on the dollar. FDR is looked upon as some type of great hero. It's a lie. What he did is after banks cratered the economy and turned tens of millions of Americans into homeless vagabonds, he then came in and told Wall Street, and a quote that was very similar to what Obama said in 2008, "I'm the only thing that's standing between you and the pitchforks." And then he saved capitalism, not in a good way. He enriched the bankers. He gave them even more money, and then he gave the Americans pennies on the dollar. They lost their life savings, and then they were given pennies on the dollar for their life savings. So yeah, we can sit up here and say how amazing Social Security was, but if somebody kneecaps me and then gives me a crutch, I'm not going to be thankful. And that's what they're doing. They're kneecapping Americans, and the Democrats are turning around and saying, "We're going to give you a crutch," and that's charity. No, it's not. That's evil. And so then we fast forward to Clinton. He's the one that tore away the Glass-Steagall Act, I think it was, under his administration. And beyond that, NAFTA destroyed the heartland of America and basically destroyed the middle class. And then Obama, then he did what he did with quantitative easing. So it's the Democrats who are actually more than Republicans creating these economic imbalances, because they're enacting policies that Republicans can never enact, because Republicans have pushback, whereas Democrats, after 8 years of Bush, Democrats get into power and they say, "Oh, we're here for you," and we believe them, and then they end up doing even worse.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. And it seems like the role of the Democrats now is they have to do the things that might cause an uprising of the masses.
Yeah.
And they have to convince us that they're on our side. But I think that's been increasingly difficult to do. I think it's all falling apart now. And as we could see, I guess maybe the Bernie-Hillary primary sort of brought that to the surface. And that might be a good time to segue into, what you talk about, what Bernie got to, I think. And, I have some big problems with Bernie, by the way, with his foreign policy. I just don't trust him on it. And, but I was a Bernie supporter. So what Bernie brought to the surface is what you call the class hierarchy within the construct of race and within the construct of all the isms, really, if you will. Then that's when we saw this giant, giant crack in the Democratic Party, where that's when the establishment and the grassroots sort of broke apart. And I forget where I was going with this, but you talk about it within. You said that Malcolm X also came to this realization,
Right.
and what I was really taken by was, I don't know if this is a good transition, but
Sure.
I'm going to just quote you here. You talk about the whole cottage industry of Black opinion leaders and gatekeepers.
Right.
You say, quote, they're now employing the injuries of the masses to deflect well-deserved criticism, and that identity's been weaponized, addressing the structural nature of racism and sexism. Folks like Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, and identity politics shysters across the political spectrum are turning the victims of systemic oppression into human shields. And I thought, Jesus, he just nailed that there. You know, it's this, I don't even know how to, I'm going to leave that to you because you're the one who really clarified that. But what's going on right now is just, it's really pernicious. And I would say not sustainable. I don't think everyone's falling for this.
Yeah.
It's a defense. It's like a desperate defense, I think, because too many people can see through it. But so what do you think about that? Talk to us some more about that, if you would.
Sure. So, I'm originally from Ethiopia. So Ethiopians say that, and rightly so, that we've never been colonized. But there is an insidious nature of tribalism that currently is eating away at Ethiopia that we need to be careful about. But I've always studied colonialism, colonization that took place within Africa. Initially, that was my interest. And I remember at one point I wrote an article. I mean, not article. I keep talking about that now. I wrote a paper for college about what happened in Rwanda, and how is it that folks were able to. How is that possible? 1 million people to pass away by the public basically being turned on each other. And what I realized at that moment, and there's a connected nature to almost every African country that got colonized, is that there's a playbook. They elevate one tribe above the rest. They tell that one tribe that's in power that, hey, listen, you're special, you're privileged, but you need us to protect you. We'll give you the guns, we'll give you the money, we'll give you the status, and then of course whoever the figurehead is at the top of that government, which comes from that quote unquote privileged tribe, they become beholden to the colonizers to maintain power, and then the same colonizers go back to the other tribes and they tell them, hey, listen, you should have your freedom. That special tribe is oppressing you, so we'll give you money, we'll give you a means to fight for your freedom, but never enough to where they could actually overtake the government. So there's strife and there's violence, and this is the status quo in African countries until that leader does something that the colonizers do not like. They deviate from the script that they're given, and all of a sudden, the country is there's there's what do you call it? There's like not an invasion, but destabilized. The country is destabilized. More money all of a sudden, and more guns and more ammunition is given to one of the out groups, and then the government's overthrown, and then the new tribe is in power. Now all of a sudden, the new tribe is elevated, and the playbook continues. And this is the vicious ends of tribalism that led to colonization. So I thought this was an African problem. What I see now is that America is being the same thing. They're doing the same thing to America. The tribes here are color. The tribes here is gender. The tribes here are orientation. The tribes here are religion. Oh, and the biggest tribe of them all, beyond color, close to color, color is the biggest tribe of them all, is politics. So these are the tribes, and there's always within the context of color, the elevated group, quote unquote, is white people, right? I put quote marks around these labels. I understand how nefarious they are, and so they're elevated. But even within Africa, the elevated tribe, only a sliver of that tribe enjoys the benefits of being in power. The rest are struggling. The rest are marginalized too. But they get so caught up in that feeling of superiority, that feeling of, oh, we got it made, that they're willing to overlook that they're struggling in order to latch on to this quote unquote privileged status that they've been given. So the vast majority of the countries in Africa, you have the marginalized and the very few that are doing well. So in America, you have the white people that are elevated above the rest. But really, within the white people, there's a mass. The majority are struggling. You know, when I was homeless and I was living in shelters in South Carolina, and Iowa, and Tennessee, and ultimately in Colorado, the majority of the people that at these shelters were white. This is not to discount the fact that racism exists. This is not to discount the fact that sexism exists. But I'm just saying that there's the wider sources of injustice is impacting everybody. Some different than others. You know, some feel the heat more than others. But what does it profit us to argue about who's having it worse when all of us are having it bad? So the tribalism. This is what we're not understanding. That Democrats, Republicans are there to incite these tribal instincts, and the more we do that, the more, you know, what happened in Rwanda with people turning on against each other with machetes. We're doing that with social media, and the violence here is not necessarily an AK-47, but it's just as much violence. You know, it might not kill people, but the words that we use against each other are just as powerful. And so America is being driven, and you'll never know. Rwanda's never, ever thought it was possible that 1 million people would perish within a year. But that's the danger of tribalism. And that's the danger of mob thinking. And if strife breaks out, which it could, in America it could happen, they're pushing us to be confrontational on purpose. They're pushing us they're antagonizing us on purpose. Because if strife does break out, power would then immediately even be more powerful, because in the place of crisis, central authority becomes, has an unquestioned authority. And so these are the things that we need to be careful about. It might sound good to go onto social media and bash all white people, bash all black people, bash all Republicans. For me, when I criticize Republicans, I'm not talking about Republican voters. When I talk against Trump, I harbor no animosity towards his supporters. I used to be Obama's biggest supporter. Does that mean that I'm responsible for what happened to Yemen, to Syria? That I'm responsible for what happened with quantitative easing and the homeless people that I see everywhere? No. Like I said, there's a line of demarcation between compliance, which is complacency, I guess, and the rest, and the few who enact these vicious policies that lead up to economic inequalities, and then spread outward into the issues that we see before us.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important point, and you can feel it because if you decide that you want to try to find common ground, and I see this, and I've experienced this in the anti-interventionist sort of community. There's maybe a loose community of people who are anti-war. Our politics don't line up. There's conservatives, there's liberals, whatever. I hate these labels. There are libertarians, and so, but there's common ground on the war and foreign policy thing.
Yeah.
But you can see that if any alliances really start to form, they get attacked.
Yeah.
There are literal attempts to prevent those kind of alliances from happening, like that whole red-brown thing, accusations that were going on. I mean, just ridiculous things.
Yeah.
So you can definitely see that there are people, whoever they are, the establishment, if you will, I don't know who they are, they definitely do not want this kind of these kind of coalitions or alliances to form. And you did a good job of going into that, sort of why that is, the root causes of why that is.
Yeah.
Now, we're sort of running out of time, but I want to hit on one more thing, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Another thing that just sort of hit home with me, because like in the same way that it bothers me that the Democrats or you could even just say the left or whatever, because I don't even think they're the left. See, these labels just totally
Yeah,
don't
I'm
work.
telling you, the label, right? It's
Yeah.
that's the problem becomes the tribe. That's tribalism. We just don't know it, but that's
Yeah.
exactly what it is.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely shedding my tribalism, but there's remnants of it there.
Yeah, me too.
But
Me too. Trust me.
yeah, so
I'll struggle with that
yeah,
too.
yeah. So in the same way that it bothers me that the Democrats, that I'm more irritated by them, and I seem to even call them out more because I expect certain things from the other,
Right.
the other side. I don't expect. But the other thing you say here, and another thing that bothers me, is the whole issue of hypocrisy.
Mm.
Hypocrisy just
Yeah, yeah,
irks
yeah,
me
yeah. Me
so
too. Me
much.
too. Me
It
too.
really, really gets to me.
Me
It
too.
burns,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
And I think to myself, but why does it bother you so much? Everybody engages in
Mm.
hypocrisy. In some ways, they're just lazy about it, or it's just something we can't avoid. So why does hypocrisy bother you so much is what I ask myself. And you say here, you say hypocrisy. I'll read the whole paragraph so
Sure.
there's some context. You say, quote, I would be the first person to applaud Harris, Obama, Trump, or any politician who sincerely admit their mistakes and try to make amends. Far from doing so, these con artists pretend to do the right thing as they pour fuel on the fire. There's a reason why hypocrisy is an egregious sin. It's hard to be forgiven when the offender is lying about his penance.
Mm.
You say that, and there's a couple more things in here I just want to highlight to set you up to talk about this. The other one, you talk about how Malcolm X is painted by many in the mainstream media and academia as a firebrand who preached from the pulpit of exclusion. But those who know his history understand very well that who he was when his journey concluded was vastly different than the caricature of Malcolm X that's presented by the institutions of power he spoke against. It never fails. First, kill the messenger, then co-opt their message. The truth that, that whole thing, kill the messenger, then co-opt their message. And then in the next paragraph, you say, his decision to pivot from friction and instead seek the light of universal justice is the reason why he was silenced. The status quo rewards charlatans, but has a way of killing off unifying voices. And again, I think you just nailed it here. I can't explain it the way that you did. In few words, you did it too. This is some serious preaching, I have to say. Teaching.
No,
Let's say
imagine.
teaching, here you have here. So if you want to, maybe expand on that a little.
Sure. So even this conversation, to be honest with you. So you remember how I said it's hard to wash away these tribal prisms because they become your prison, and so it's very hard to have conversation and say white, black, But let me tell you a quick story real fast. When I was at
Yeah.
work, somebody said, "Hey, have you?" I went up to somebody and said, "Have you met so and so?" He goes, "Who?" And I said, the lady on the ninth floor." He's like, "Who?" She's kind of a little overweight. She I'm trying to explain this lady to him. He was like, I'm not, okay, the black lady on the ninth floor. He goes, "Oh yeah, I know you're talking about." Right? So
Yeah.
it is almost impossible. I dare anybody to go a day without using the labels black and white. It is almost impossible. It is so ingrained in society, and none of us really understand that race is a construct created by racists. It was created by slave traders, by oppressors, by colonizers, in order to put a caste system on America and the world by extension. These labels that are imposed upon us, black and white, are the most insidious of labels. If you look at what they mean, why certain people are called black and certain other people are being called white, there's a reason for all these things. And as a person that loves words and the power within words, we got to be very careful about how we choose to call ourselves because we become that which we call ourselves. I say this to kind of give a little context to what I'm about to say next. You as a quote unquote, I always use quote marks now, as a quote unquote white lady, and me as a quote unquote black man, right?
Right. Right.
This is actually a perfect illustration of what happened with Malcolm X. There was when I think he went to Columbia. I'm not sure what school it was specifically. And at some point, a white girl said, "Hey, I want to help out. What can I do?" She was moved by what he said. He said, "You can't do anything," because he hadn't changed at that point. And when he talked about in the autobiography during the latter stages of the book, he said that was his biggest regret because instead of creating a moment of like a unifying moment and helping to mend the racial scars of America, he actually gave her a stiff arm, and stiff armed her. And that's why I said the power of Malcolm X is the same power that you find in almost every prophet in the Bible and every prophet that came throughout history, is that they changed. Flawed people become, I don't know by what grace, they even if you look at the history of Malcolm X, this man didn't go to college. He was a street hustler. He was a drug dealer. He was a pimp. He was a criminal. But yet, for me, it boggles my mind that type of person then has the ability to. I can't think of anybody in the 20th century that was as insightful, intelligent, and has much acumen as Malcolm X. None. He is in a class above everybody else in the 20th century, and he's one of the most insightful people in the history of humanity, as far as I'm concerned. What Einstein did with quantum physics and Malcolm X did with social commentary and being able to really pick up on things. But even given that, he was still flawed. And given that, he used the ability that he was given initially to speak into the divides. So the reason I say this is because, this conversation right here would not have been possible 7 years ago because I also didn't have my quote unquote mecca moments. I used to be just as divisive. I used to think that the ills of the world was because of white people, and my notion of justice was only for black people. And so I had to go. My mecca moment happened in missions and in homeless shelters, and that was when I had my awakening. And I'm not trying to compare myself to Malcolm X by any means, but all of us have the ability to rise above our flaws and to really engender a spirit of unity. And Martin Luther King said a long time ago that you can't fight hate with hate, and you can't drive out darkness with darkness. Kind of paraphrasing, that might not be the exact quote, but we've been conditioned as a society to fight injustice with injustice, and it's to our detriment. And the only people that thrive in that paradigm is the status quo, is the establishment, the ones that always thrive. We, the rest of us, who keep unleashing this vicious attacks on each other, we are going to suffer for it. And like I said, it might seem like a bridge too far to think that what happened in Rwanda could ever happen in America, but people in Rwanda thought the same thing too, and they learned the hard way to not be about tribalism after a million people perished. In fact, even now they say Rwandans always say one Rwanda. They don't say Hutus and Tutsis like they used to, because they know. So I hope and pray to God that our redemption, our decision to walk away from these tribal instincts about ourselves would not come by the way of Hotel Rwanda or Hotel Americana. That if that happens, that's our children that's going to be dropping on the streets, all of us, irrespective of color.
That's right.
So the wisdom of Malcolm X in this way is something that we need to wake up to. Let us evolve the same way that he did and seek inclusive justice, or else we're going to have inclusive suffering.
I'm 100% with you on that, and I hate the way that sexism's being weaponized too. I know it's not the exact same thing, but I definitely see the parallels. And I appreciate you offering. I was going to ask you at the end, but you already answered it. What do we do? What can we do? We don't have any power, not much power.
Right.
But we have even less power when we're divided like this. And for these sort of, well, some of them are justified reasons, but some of them are just fabricated reasons. So, I appreciate what you offered there at the end, and I don't want to keep you any longer. I know everybody's got things to do. But, if you would just kind of wrap up with whatever else you want to say, and make sure to tell us how to support you, how to support Ghion Journal,
Sure.
and where to find you and all of that.
So actually, if I want to, let me tie into one more thing that you said. I think it doesn't profit us any to sit up here and compare who has more pain. We should all address the fact that we're all pained. Because, I was talking to somebody yesterday, and why I hate labels like white privilege, because they're conversation enders instead of conversation initiators. If I break my leg, and I'm about to enter into a bus, and I bang my leg against the door, and I say ouch, and a man behind me has no legs. He's on a crutch with only one leg. If he turns around to me and says, I wish I had your privilege.
Yeah.
At least you could feel pain. I can't even feel. I don't even have a leg. He's right.
Yeah.
I'm privileged compared to him. I don't want to hear that. I will be upset.
It doesn't mean you don't have pain too, right?
Because at that exact moment, I'm gonna be like, even though he's hurting, my first instinct is like, screw off. Who are you to tell me I don't have pain? So, we should be able to have conversations about our suffering without trying to monopolize, and in the process diminish what other people are going through. Like I said, if we're all in a skillet, if some people are in the center of the skillet and some might be on the periphery, at the end of the day, it's just a matter of time before we all get cooked. So why does it matter who's being cooked more? We're all being cooked. And so, I hope we get it, and part of this, by the way, I know the article that I wrote, again, going back to these constructs, you as a quote unquote white woman, probably thought twice about even sharing the article, because these are the color lines that blind and bind Americans, because you can't even talk about these things if you're of a certain color or a certain gender, at the risk of being called a racist or being called a sexist. And so this is what I mean about weaponization of identity. Somebody said not too long ago in a response to the article that I wrote, he said, power has learned to tip its bayonet with people of color and women. And I was like, when I read that, it was there's poetic power to that, because that isn't exactly what power has done. They're putting the pains of quote unquote people of color, which that by itself is stupid. Like who is people of color? Like so who is not of color then, if that's the case? But they're putting marginalized people, whether it's based on gender, race, or whatever it is, and they're using us to then stab at anybody else that dares to question the system, and that's insidious, and we feed into it. So it is my hope that we walk away from these things, and that we walk away from these bourgeois hustlers within the Democrat Party and these racist hustlers within the Republican Party, and seek unity if we're going to make a difference in this world.
That's right.
As for me, you can find me. I'm the co-founder and the editor of the Ghion Journal. In fact, the Ghion Journal was founded when I was going through a stint of homelessness. It was founded at a forum called Harvest Forum in Wellington, Colorado. When I was living there for a year and a half, working in the kitchen, making $7 a week, we're living rent-free. And I don't say that to complain. I was making six figures at Booz Allen Hamilton. I was never happy. And it's not until I lost everything that I found some type of purpose in my life. The purpose I could never find climbing the corporate ladder, I found it mired at the bottom of society. So there's redemption comes for all of us through hardship. It's like when a woman's giving birth, the most painful part is the delivery, but the most beautiful part is right after the baby comes out. And so all of us go through a lot of tribulation sometimes. In the process, we'll never know exactly what the deliverance is, if I could extend that, that analogy of giving birth. But when the baby comes out, when the blessing comes out, then we'll understand exactly what the purpose was for our tribulations. Um, so yeah, the Ghion Journal was started to speak against the divisive nature of politics, to speak up for collective or inclusive justice, and to just offer a different perspective from the monetization of corporate news that thrives through the model of dissension and conflict and pitting people against each other, and really by fueling the tribal instincts of Americans and humanity in general. So we're trying to temper those things down as opposed to enhancing them. You can find us in fact, I'm about to go write an article at some point today. There's 6 of us all together. There's me, the co-founder, Beatty Becky. There's also Steve Boney, Ray Rainier, Shay. There is now I'm going to get in trouble because I just blanked out on the other names. But we write on Bree Hood, and there's a couple of other names and Kathy Payton. So we try to publish articles once a day. We're a website that does not take a penny, not a red cent from corporations. In fact, we state it exclusively. We don't. Corporations are not welcome and they're evil. Because we believe in community empowerment, and corporations are community killers in that way. So we not necessarily depend, but we are driven and empowered by the contributions of our readers and our audience on YouTube as well. So you can check us out anytime at Ghion.journal.com. And you can find me on Twitter at Teodrose Fikre. And you can also email us anytime at info@GhionJournal.com. And as you're able, like I always say, I used to have a problem with this part, telling folks to contribute as they can. But there's a restaurant in Fort Collins that I used to go to called Fogo Cafe, and their whole model was predicated on instead of having price points, of letting people pay as they could or give as they could. And so I've gone in there on a couple of occasions and gave them only 50 cents because that's all I had in my pockets. And there's other times where I gave a couple more. And I'm looking forward to the day where I go back and give $100 for the food. And so in the same space, you had homeless people eating for free. And if they couldn't pay, they just help to clean up at the end. And then you have people that will give it $100, $200 a pop. And the meal was the same for everybody. To me, that's almost like my idea of heaven on earth. And so that's the same model that we're incorporated for the Ghion Journal. We just ask people to contribute as they can. And then that's it. And we're all about building a community, a community-driven publication. And that's our tagline is, our pens are our swords. The word, the WORD is all capitalized because the word is powerful, and the word is what is either going to elevate discourse or bury us into the abyss of divisiveness. And so we choose to elevate as opposed to burying people. So thank you again for having me, Joanne. I'm looking forward to another conversation at some point.
I'd love to do that. Yeah, I've wanted to have this conversation for a long time, but I didn't know how to do it. And I really appreciate you giving me that opportunity.
Definitely. So, it was a good conversation. We could talk for another 2 hours, but I know you have...
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's already 5 more topics I want to get into with you. So hopefully we do that sometime. Cool. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right, you too.
Thank you for listening, and a special thanks to Teodrose Fikre. Follow him on Twitter at Teodrose Fikre, Teodrose Fikre. Find his work at GhionJournal.com and at the Ghion Journal channel on YouTube. Round the Empire Podcast, independent media. Your support, really important. Please pitch in patreon.com/roundtheempire or paypal.me/roundtheempirepod. You can also find these links on our website, aroundtheempire.com. Also, I'll be adding a few more payment methods soon, easy ways to contribute to the show. The syndicated audio podcast has been the main focus for Around the Empire till now, and it's where we have most of our traffic. We're on most podcast apps like iTunes, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, all of them. So please subscribe to us on your favorite one. And if you like us, give us a good rating and a review, which helps with ranking and visibility. I'm gearing up for some new kinds of content, including video content and live streams. For this, I need to build up the YouTube channel, so please subscribe there, youtube.com/c/aroundtheempire. Also, make sure to hit the thumbs up icon to like the individual videos. Follow us on Twitter @AroundTheEmpire, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.